Hello everyone. This class will be about talking about the structure of the nominal clauses that we are going to see for the first half of this semester. So as we mentioned in class, there is a document, there are two documents that we have where we have sort of a list of types of nominal clauses. The one I'm going to be referring to is this sort of the big Excel document, right? And you'll notice that if you look, I'm looking at this document now, so it would be helpful for you perhaps to hit pause on your video and to look at this document, with me together. We'll look at this together. So you will see that we have on the left column, we have this column entitled structure, right? And then we have a list. Then there are 8 types or structures that are listed. The first one is the that clause, which we have seen, right? Then we have the second one being the interrogative clause. Then we have the WH interrogative, and then the nominal relative. So those are the first 4: the that clause, the interrogative clause, the WH interrogative, and the nominal relative, right? And those are what we call those first 4, and those are the ones that we're going to look at today. Okay, these first 4 are commonly referred to as what we call finite clauses. And when we say finite clause, that means that they involve a conjugated verb, meaning that we have in these clauses we have a subject and a conjugated verb, in a sense just like what we would have in a sentence. Now, to review what this means with what we've already seen, if we consider that clauses, which we've studied in class, we've seen these a few times in class. If you remember, to make a that clause, you just take a sentence, any old sentence. For example, I like chocolate. So we have a sentence, I like chocolate. To make a that clause, we add that in front of it, which is what we call a subordinator, ou conjonction de subordination, and we obtain a that clause. So we have our sentence, I like chocolate. Notice it's a full sentence. It works as a sentence. It's fully autonomous, right? We can put a period or full stop after it, and it will function as a fully autonomous sentence, like any other sentence, right? But when I put the that in front of it, it becomes a subordinate clause, because that is a subordinator. If I say that I like chocolate, we feel like something's missing, right? Why? Because that has subordinated what follows. So notice what follows that, right? I like chocolate, for example, has a subject, I, has a verb, like, that's fully conjugated, right? Just like we see in a normal sentence. So that is what we mean in this case. That's sort of the way that we can say that the that clause is a finite clause, because it involves a subject and a fully conjugated verb. When they say fully conjugated verbs, verb means that it's going to be, now you can sort of remember what we studied in your first grammar course, where that means it's going to have, there's going to be this question of tense and aspect. We're going to have something like, it could be the simple present, it could be something like the simple past, it could be something like the present continuous, it could be the past perfect continuous, something with, a tense, either the present or the past tense, involving a verbal construction. It could be the simple construction, as in the present simple and the simple past, or it could be the perfect construction if we have like the present perfect or the past perfect. So, but in all cases we have what we call a conjugated verb, and a conjugated verb always agrees with the subject. For example, that I like chocolate, if we change that to he likes chocolate, here we have verbal agreement between he and likes. That means that with that verbal agreement between the subject and the verb, that means we have a conjugated verb. So that I'm not going to go through review any more about that clause, because we've already studied that. As a reminder, we studied that it most often appears, can appear as in different functions. I'm not going to really focus on different functions that these structures, these 4 structures can play. But when we've looked at the way that clauses typically appear in sentences, the most common use we saw was as a complement of a verb of speech recognition. For example, we have our that clause, that I like chocolate. That's the one we've been using, today. I can say, he said that I like chocolate, right? And notice that, so say, is going to be a verb, a speech verb, and that clause that follows, which is the function of that clause. Function is direct object, right? The structure is of that clause. That I like chocolate is going to be the complement of the speech verb, or it could be a verb of cognition. He thought that I like chocolate, right? So this means that it's very often involved in what we call, when we have that clause, it'll very often be involved in what we call indirect reported speech, right? So that's our brief review of that clauses. Now we're going to look on to our next type of clause. So as I said, we're going to look at 4 today. The that clause, the interrogative clause is the second one. The third one is what we call the WH interrogative, and the next one is the nominal relative. Now the interrogative clause, in a sense, is just the interrogative version of the that clause. It's when we have what we call closed questions or yes/no questions. Questions that when you ask them, you can answer them with a simple yes or a no. And so if, for example, we have, instead of saying, he said that he liked chocolate, right? I could say he asked. No, I'm not going to say he asked that, right? There's not a compatibility with an interrogative verb, right? And a that clause. So we need to use an interrogative clause. So we're going to say he asked if I like chocolate, right? And notice the corresponding question is, do you like chocolate? And the question, and with a question like this, what we call a closed question, a question like, do you like chocolate, is going to be yes, I do, no, I don't. Notice yes and no suffices to answer the question. And that we call it a closed question because it doesn't really lead anywhere. Once I say, do you like chocolate? Yes, end of discussion. It's not a very good way, by the way, if you want to make a discussion sort of go on, to ask a yes or no question. It's sort of end of discussion, or at least that point has been covered. So we'll notice that the structure of the interrogative clause is going to involve, first of all, we have our conjunction, which is going to be either if or whether, right? He asked if I like chocolate or whether I like chocolate, and they both work. The next thing that is important to consider, and this is something that is also true in French, is that what follows the subordinator, either if or whether, right, is not going to be in the interrogative form. Notice, he asked if I like chocolate, right? Notice I didn't say if do I like chocolate, whether do I like chocolate. Okay, so that's an important thing to notice, is that the interrogation, right, or the question, is sort of taken care of by the if or whether subordinator, right? That subordinator, if or whether, indicates that what follows the question, so you don't really need to use an interrogative structure. Otherwise, it would be sort of like a double question, and it just doesn't sound right. And sometimes perhaps I'd like you to practice, it's a good idea. We're going to do exercises when you kind of practice using reported speech with questions. If I could have my question, oh, do you know the way to school? So try yourself to say, he asked if I knew the way to school, right? Okay. So notice he asked if do I know, no, right? He asked if I knew the way to school, I know, or I know. He asked if I know the way to school, or if I knew the way to school. If I know the way to school, or if you prefer, they're both correct. If I knew the way to school, right? In both cases, I knew the way to school, I know the way to school is appears as an affirmation, right? It is the sort of canonical affirmative word order, right? So it is the subordinator, either if or whether, that makes it a question. That's what makes it right. And it is also the fact that it is going to be followed by a verb that indicates question. He asked if, he asked whether. Okay, so there's a sort of a transformation between for example, I could say I like chocolate. Someone could, that is my statement, right? And someone could listen to my statement and said, "No, I'm sorry, my question that's not a question." So someone who had a reported speech of my statement is going to use just a that clause. Oh, he said that he liked chocolate. I like chocolate. Another speaker who hears that is going to tell someone else about it and say, he said that he liked chocolate. I like chocolate. He said that he liked chocolate. Okay. Let's say I asked someone else, do you like chocolate? Someone else is going to report what I said. He asked if it could be you or he, someone else, right? Or she, right? He asked if you like chocolate, if he or she liked chocolate. It depends on who we're talking about. But at any rate, it's going to be he asked if or whether. He asked if you like chocolate, whether. And then notice you like chocolate, he or she likes chocolate or likes chocolate. These are different variations. In all cases, we have used the affirmative structure, right? And notice with when we have this what we call this interrogative clause or an if-whether interrogative clause, it's important to note that once again, since these are yes/no questions, you may sort of in some situations feel comfortable adding an or not. He asked if they liked chocolate or not, right? It's not necessary, but it indicates that we're dealing with this question of sort of polarity. We're only asking for a yes or a no. And we could say yes I do or no I don't, right? You can add this what we call this question tag when you say yes or no. But regardless, the question we're asking is a simple, are we talking about positive or negative? And we're not asking the person to go farther. Okay, so in a sense, the that clause, which is our first structure that we saw, and then the one we've just seen, the interrogative clause, are sort of a pair, right? We just have this sort of simple affirmation that is, usually in reported speech, we have our that clause, right? And then we have this sort of, when we have a reported question, simple yes or no question, we're going to use the interrogative clause, right? And so they form sort of, they kind of work together. So now we're going to move on to our next type, our third type, which is going to be a WH interrogative. So in this case, we are not talking about a yes/no question. We are going to talk about a question using what we call WH words. So these are words that we've seen before, such as who. It could be whom. It could be whose wouldn't really work in this case. It could be what, how, why, where. Okay, and once again, they're going to be a complement of a verb in sort of what we call an interrogative verb or a verb indicating that we're talking about a question. So that would be something like, he asked where I live, right? And notice that is the report. Where I live is the reported speech for where do you live? He asked where I live, right? And the question is, he asked where do you live? He asked why we were studying French, right? And then that's the reported speech version of the question is, why are we studying French? Here's my question. Why are we studying French? Someone gives that in a reported speech. He asked why we were studying French. Notice, once again, we do not repeat the interrogative structure. He asked why we were, not he asked why are we. Hopefully you can understand that. This is where it's very useful for your ability to not really be sort of more sure of what you're doing when you're saying these kinds of sentences, and this is often where you hesitate. Important to note that for French speakers, this can also lead to problems. For example, very young, usually people who are sort of French speakers, very young, who are learning their own language, they might say, oui, il m'a demandé pourquoi je suis allé. Il m'a demandé pourquoi est-ce que je. You're not going to say pourquoi est-ce que when we're talking about du discours rapporté, d'accord, indirect. So you're once again in French, you're going to say il m'a demandé pourquoi je suis allé. You're not going to say il m'a demandé pourquoi est-ce que je suis allé ou pourquoi suis-je allé. Okay. Et vous allez peut-être remarquer, oui, en fait, c'est quelque chose qui est un peu difficile pour ceux qui apprennent le français. In the same vein, we have the similar difficulty, right? Which is the same one we have with the interrogative clause, with the WH interrogative clauses, when we are giving in reported speech, right? These questions, right, that use WH words like how. He asked how to get to the post office, right? Okay. He wanted to know. He asked or he wondered. We could use, this is sort of the mental version. He wondered when we were leaving, right? So we always have this idea of a question. Okay. So I hope that's fairly fairly clear for the WH interrogative. I don't want to go into too much more detail. We're going to review this together in class, but I want to make sure that you have at least a sort of a neat vision in your head of this progression. And just a reminder that the difference between the interrogative clause and the WH interrogative clause is, with the interrogative clause, right, we're using either if or whether. We're talking about closed questions when we have these yes/no answers. With the WH interrogative clause that we have just seen, right, we're talking about what we call open questions, which involved WH words like who, when, where, etc. Right. So that means the answer to that question is not going to be yes or no. If I say where do you live and you say yes, that's a little bit insufficient. Do you like chocolate? Yes, that works. That's a closed question. But where do you live? You say I live in such and such a place. Okay. So that is the I would say the fundamental idea in this case. And now our final category, which is grammatically speaking a little bit more difficult. And you will notice there is a second video that you don't have to watch. It's sort of it's a video anticipating a much more in-depth discussion of relative clauses. And to be honest, there is a certain difficulty in teaching this class, is when to sort of discuss nominal relatives and when to discuss relative clauses. Now, we assume that you have seen at a sort of a cursory level, is sort of at not a very in-depth level, relative clauses, right? And nominal relatives are we could say are something of a sort of sophisticated version of a relative clause that can play a nominal role. Now that's sort of an overview of what that might mean, but of course it's really hard to understand what I'm talking about when I say that. So if you would like to, you might find that it would only confuse you, but if you would like to review relative clauses, right, or sort of anticipate, because we're going to study relative clauses in the second half of the semester, right, for the second test, right? But if you would like to anticipate the study of relative clauses, and this will, if it helps you with nominal relative clauses, I invite you to do so by watching this video, right? That is the following video in this, for this class this week. But you might not want to. You might prefer perhaps rewatching this video, making sure that you're really square with that clauses, interrogative clauses, WH interrogatives, and nominal relatives. So now we're going to get into nominal relative clauses, and it's a little bit more complicated. So nominal relatives on the surface look a lot like WH interrogatives. They involve the same word. For example, they involve WH words, right? The WH words such as when, where, why, how, who, and these. But in this case, we don't have them being a complement of an interrogative word such as said or wonder, right? So that means that there is not a corresponding question in this case. Notice the examples I gave, right? We're often cases of what we have when we have reported indirect speech, right? And there's always a sort of a corresponding question. For example, he asked where we should go, right? Where we should go, structure is going to be a WH interrogative, function, direct object, right? Complement of the verb, asked, right? But that's the version when we have indirect reported speech. If I give the version with the quotation marks, meaning direct reported speech, we can kind of find that question that is behind this. He asked, deux points, j'ouvre les guillemets, where should we go? Right, with a question mark, right? So with the WH interrogative, there's always a corresponding question, right, that we can kind of restore, right, if we sort of reestablish the reported question, right, which might not be visible on the surface when we have indirect reported speech, right, because if you remember, we don't reproduce the word order of a question. We say he asked where we should go. Notice where we should go is affirmative word order, right? Okay, and that's what I said that you should pay attention to and practice being comfortable with when you use this, right? So to relative clauses, we use the same words, right? We use the same words when, how, why, these same WH words, but they function, they're not used as complements, right, of question verbs, right, but they're used as sort of special relative pronouns, or what we call fused relative pronouns, and this is where it gets tricky. Okay, so an example would be, notice instead of using a question verb, I can, let's say, once again use an affirmative verb. I can say something like, he said why we were going. I'm going to write this. It's going to be difficult to write down, but he said why we were going. Okay. So first of all, we say we have this verb said here, which means we're not dealing with an interrogative. So it's not going to be, we have why followed by the complement of why. We say, we might think, right, that in this case we have an WH interrogative, but there's no question. He said. Now notice WH words always correspond with sort of missing information, right? Notice there is a reason that isn't expressed, right? But it doesn't correspond necessarily with the question. If it doesn't correspond with the question, it's not a WH interrogative. So this one isn't a WH interrogative. So that means it's going to be what we call a nominal relative. Okay, that's the sort of the most surface level way to understand it. So that means why we were going, right? Well, I'm going to put brackets around it. Hope you can see. He said why we were going. I would say the structure of that is going to be a nominal relative, and the function is going to be a direct object, right? So it has the same function that we would have in a WH interrogative, but it's not a question, so it's not going to be a WH interrogative, right? So why do we call this a nominal relative? So this is where it gets a little bit clever. So we look at this word why, right? And we can actually notice that what we say is why is actually it's a little bit sophisticated, but it'll enable us to really understand the structure of what's going on. And once you're used to this, it'll hopefully make it easier for you to express yourself with this kind of example. So the idea is we say that why is a relative pronoun, right? Okay, with what we call a hidden antecedent. Now, so what we can do is we can actually rewrite this why. We can kind of make appear what is called the hidden antecedent. Now I'll do it so that it'll become clear. So instead of saying, so sort of the long version of this, right, is we can make this hidden nominal antecedent appear. So that would give us, instead of he said why we were going, he said the reason why we were going. So I'll write that. So, this is the same sentence. He said why we were going, and he said the reason why we were going, right? So what we've kind of done is we've kind of unpacked. Notice why is sort of a very why is a sort of very compact form. And we've said that this why actually contains a hidden noun, being the reason, right? That we can actually suppress. We don't need to suppress it, right? And this is why, by the way, we're calling this, we call this a here we have a nominal relative. Some people call this fused relatives, like it's fusionné. En quelque sorte, on peut dire que le nom, l'antécédent est y et fusionné dans y. Well, that's why I'm saying we kind of unpack it. Now, so let's look at what we have here in our second longer version, right? We have he said the reason why we were going, right? So if we analyze this, we say, well, how would you analyze this noun phrase? We can say, oh, I see what's happening. We have reason is the head noun. It's a noun phrase. The reason why we were going is a noun phrase, right? Okay. Reason is the head noun. The is going to be a determiner, no pre-modifier. And why we were going is going to be structure relative clause and the function post-modifier. Now, once again, we're going to look at this. We're going to study relative clauses more in detail, and we've seen them before. Relative clauses, and if you review this video, the second video, this is an older video where I discuss relative clauses, you will study this fact. But what we see here is that relative clauses are post modifiers in noun phrases. That's typically their function. The structure is a relative clause, and the function is a post modifier in noun phrases. They're giving us information about reasons. Which reason? Oh, the reason why we were going. So to sum up, he said the reason why we were going, right? The reason why we were going is a noun phrase, right? Okay, and reason is the head noun, the is the determiner, while we were going is going to be the relative clause. So that means that sort of when we have, looking up to our shorter version, he said while we were going, what we say is, ooh, yes, why is a relative clause, right? Okay, because we've seen that it sort of contains a relative clause. Is it a relative clause that has sort of the hidden antecedent? Now, antecedent, when we have a relative clause, is what we call, is the head noun, reason, right? In the noun phrase, right? And it is sort of is the relative pronoun refers to it later. Why refers to reason. We're going to look at that more in detail, but this actually sort of shows us why this when we say he said while we were going can play a nominal role, because if we sort of unpack what we find in that fused relative, right, in that nominal relative, we can say that actually the structure is almost identical to a noun phrase, right? When we write the reason why we were going, that is a noun phrase, right? Okay. But when we write he said the reason why we were going, the reason why we were going is a noun phrase. But when we say he said while we were going, we have a nominal relative. So they're very close. Nominal relatives are extremely close, right, to noun phrases, which will hopefully make us understand why they can play these nominal roles. That's something worth considering. So I might leave. Well, I can maybe go farther, but maybe what helps you will give if I give you an example of what, and we can maybe use French. So I can say something like, "This is what." My pen is having trouble. We'll look at another example. I can say, "This is what we know." Okay. It's not. So here's another sentence. This is, hopefully you can see that. Oh, a little bit. I'm having difficulty. Okay, I'm no longer visible. Here's our sentence. This is what we know. Okay, so so here we can say this. We have this is. So we have a WH word, what, right? And the preceding verb is, of course, it is our copulative verb to be. It is not an interrogative verb, so we're not going to be dealing with the WH interrogative. So it's very likely that we are going to be dealing with a nominal relative, right? So let's look at what we know. So that means, let's say we put it into brackets. And so the structure of what we know, of course, is going to be a nominal relative. And here the function, by the way, here we look at our sentence, we have is going to be, it's a copulative verb, right? So this equals what we know. So that means, oh, right, we're familiar with this. We have our copulative pattern, which means that we have the function of what we know is going to be a subject complement, right? So since we said that what we know is a nominal relative, we can kind of unpack this word, right? And we can sort of show that what, right, this fused relative sort of contains a nominal antecedent. And we can do it, actually. So instead of saying this is what we know, we can say this is the thing that we know. Okay, I'm not very. So what we've seen is what, right, contains. We're replacing what by the thing that, right? I could, and so that shows that in this WH word, what we have, the thing is a noun phrase, right? That's what we call the nominal antecedent, and that we know is a post modifier, right? So the thing that we know is a noun phrase. The thing is the head of that noun. A thing is the head of that noun phrase, and it is the nominal antecedent of the relative pronoun that. So that means this WH is what we call a fused relative or a nominal relative, meaning it contains a hidden nominal antecedent, the thing, which is the head of the noun phrase of which the relative pronoun is a part. That we know is the submodifier, is the post modifier, a part of the noun phrase, the thing that we know. Okay, so and notice this helps us understand. In French, notice we say c'est ce que nous savons. Le ce que, c'est pareil, ça c'est un nom, et que nous savons is a relative pronoun. So that kind of shows that en français on a deux mots et ça reflète ce qui est un peu caché en anglais avec ces mots en WH lorsqu'ils sont de ce qu'on appelle des fused or nominal relatives, parce qu'en français on ne peut pas employer un mot. Donc anglais est un peu difficile parce que l'anglais est difficile parce qu'on dit what au lieu de ce que. Mais le ce que peut vous aider pour dire oui, je comprends que le what contient deux mots. Le ce, c'est the thing, et que, c'est the that, en quelque sorte. Okay? So hopefully that will help you. We're going to look at this more in detail, and I'm going to give you some exercises that you can practice working on. So good luck with that, and I will see you in person next week. Take care.